So good evening to everybody. My name is Pier Vittorio Aureli. I'm one of the professors in the School of Architecture, and I'm also director of the institute. And actually together with Sophie Delay, who is also a professor here at the school and also director of the section, we took the initiative to start a new, hopefully, ritual for the school, which is the school lecture series. So it's a lecture series that happen at the level of the school, so beyond the lab, beyond actually the main archipelago that compose our school. This lecture series actually will happen every semester, as it's normal in many schools around the world, so we are not the only one to organize this. It's nothing original in this idea, but somehow we hope that this will be, let's say, an opportunity to listen to very interesting guests. Tonight we welcome Emanuele Coccia, and I will very soon introduce him. But it's also a moment to be together. I really think that this is also an important opportunity to see each other and to really, as I said before, make this a ritual. And from the little I know from history, I should say that an institution usually, or even empires and civilization, collapse when people start to not attend the rituals. So we have to be very careful. So I think it's very important because the space in between professors and students, between postdoc and PhD students, between labs, is a space that we have to cultivate. And so every semester we will invite architects, but also philosophers, thinkers, to respond to a theme. The theme actually of this semester is, as you have seen, is very unique and extremely original. No one has ever thought about it before. It's housing. But of course, the reason why we choose this topic, Sophie and I, was because we realized that housing seems to be a very important topic, first of all, here at the school. I mean, we sit actually in the jury of the last PDM, and I think there were many projects about housing, and actually with very interesting ideas. But actually, there has been also a shift in the architectural profession because when I was student, actually, when we were students, housing actually was not at all a popular subject. In fact, I remember that studios were often designing museums, public spaces. So in a way, since actually a few years, it seems to be that housing is becoming again a very important topic, but also in terms of the profession. I mean, there is a new generation of architects, which I personally call the third waves. The waves of architects that today are in their maybe 40s or 50s, who actually are very much engaged with housing as a project, and especially with the topic of affordable housing, which, as you know, is very needed, but also very difficult to realize, not difficult technically, but difficult politically. But tonight it's a very special moment in the lecture series because we ask a philosopher, Emanuele Coccia, to introduce the lecture series, so to give a point of view that comes from outside the discipline of architecture. But I would say not really outside, because in fact philosophy sits at the very, very center of architecture. I mean, one of the very first modern theorists of architecture, Leon Battista Alberti, in fact, was not an architect, perhaps was not even a philosopher, but in a way, his way of discussing architecture had very strong philosophical ambitions. And I think that, in fact, Sophia and I really had this fantasy, which we hope to realize in the future, to welcome back actually a philosopher, teaching in the architectural school, which actually used to be something common many years ago. So several architectural schools really had philosophers, not architects trying to be philosophers, but real, if there are real philosophers, to really to be present in the school and to respond from the point of view of philosophy to what architects do. And so in that sense, I'm very happy to introduce Emanuele Coccia, who is a very well-known philosopher. Actually, his books are known to many people, also because they've been translated in English, which is actually interesting because not many contemporary Italian philosophers, of your generation, had that sort of privilege or fortune. And one in particular, I think, is important, and I would like to mention tonight, which is the Philosophy of the Home, which has been published by the prestigious publisher Penguin. So it's quite a big stakes for philosophy. And what is really interesting is that, and of course Emanuele emphasized that at the beginning of the book, that in the history of philosophy, domestic space has always been left aside. Of course, philosophers have always emphasized the city and public space, because this is actually where politics traditionally happen. And of course, this idea that politics only happen in public space, as we know very well as architects, has been challenged actually in the recent years by, for example, feminist thinkers who have really forced us to reinvest in domestic space as a political space. But in fact, within the history of philosophy, there is this sort of I wouldn't call it indifference, but resistance to engage actually with philosophy. So, in fact, I cannot remember anyone beside Xenophon and Leon Battista Alberti who actually really explicitly addressed domestic space as a point of reflection for philosophy. But maybe there are, I don't know, maybe that's a question for Emanuele. So in that sense, I'm extremely happy to have him to introduce us to our topic. And I know that Emanuele will do it in a very, it will really help us to expand, in fact, the topic of housing and really think not just housing itself, but really the imagination of domestic space and what we can do with that imagination. Something that really impressed me about your book, Emanuele, is that you often use the word happiness, which is it's a word that we rarely use in our vocabulary as architects, partly because we are very self-deprecating profession, but also because it's very difficult to imagine for us as architects who really design often domestic space, how our very dry plans, our dry technical drawings can be the backdrop of such a thing as happiness. But in fact, reading your book, I really realized how that can happen, and it was an extremely, really wonderful experience, and I'm sure we will have the same experience hearing your lecture. Thank you, Emanuele, for coming and starting our new lecture series.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vittorio, for this very generous presentation. Thank you, Vittorio, for the invitation. I'm extremely honored, of course, to be here in this so prestigious school. I'm very happy to be among architects, not just because you are building the future, but also because in my own formation, reading, let's say, architectural classics like the ones who are famous also among non-architects, from Lynch to Venturi, from Codas to Rossi. I remember very well the day when I opened this book and how strong the impact of this theory was. I was saying to Pier Vittorio that to me architects were always, in a way, the ones who put the words on phenomena before the rest of society, so even perceive what is happening. That's why I think it's just not in order to defend philosophy, but it's really important to have theory within architecture departments, because it's a way of not just drawing reality, but also putting words on it. So let's start. So on July 21st, 1979, two North American astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, set foot on lunar soil for the first time in human history. It's 2 o'clock. It was 2 o'clock in the morning in the United States, but the entire nation and a good portion of the planet was watching with bated breath as they were watching live telecast. The two spent 2.25 hours on recognition of the soil, collecting geological material of various kind. Then, together with a third crew member, Michael Collins, who never got off of the module, returned to planet Earth. Even before they hit the ground, it's the quality of the soil that strikes them. Armstrong says the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained. As you get close to it, it's almost like a powder. And a few steps later, his assessments are confirmed. He says again, yes, the surface is fine and powdery. I can keep it up loosely with my tool. It does adhere in fine layers like powdered charcoal to the sole and sides of my boots. And it's quite interesting. There is a huge literature about every single word that these two guys had on those 2 hours and a half. It's really difficult to consider those words that were pronounced in the space as a sort of sacred text. So they work, and they also realize that the working is even easier than in the simulation. They also realize that it's that, for instance, the model didn't leave any craters or any real footprints. And then, over time, the eyes become accustomed to the strange interplay of darkness and excess of light. And they try to make their way over into the sunlight without looking directly into the sun. And when the landscape become open, what strikes both of them is the peculiarity of this landscape that for the first time were visible to humanity. One of them says, we are essentially on a very level place here, and this is this has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States, and he invites the other to admire I'm quoting, the magnificent side out there, and the other corrects him. Yes, but it's a magnificent desolation. This is a very famous word by Aldrin. So for centuries, mankind had brooded the dream of visiting Earth satellites. Some, like Lucian of Samosata, had imagined it populated by a strange race of bowel beings, the dendrites, of male gender only, able to reproduce by cutting off the testicle and burying it into the ground. In the royal palace, there would be, I'm quoting, a great mirror set over a well-mediocre depth where one can hear all that is said about the earth and see all the cities and all the people, as if one were in the midst of them. And of course, other writers such as Ariosto had imagined instead that we could find on the moon other rivers, other lakes, other countryside, very different from what we know on Earth, but dotted with cities, castles, majestic houses, but also vast and deserted forests where nymphs rentless hunt wild beasts. And inspired by Leon Battista Alberti, Ariosto also imagined something very beautiful that has touched European imagination for a long time, that the moon is the immense repository of all that has been lost. Amazing. So everything that we are losing, it's like on the moon, due to human intelligence. For instance, time, luck, what has been lost, I'm quoting, what has been lost here has been gathered there. Not only the ancient empires of the nation we have read about, as well as reputation, favors, loves, wealth, and all those things that never return once lost. And also the tears and the sighs of lovers, the useless time that is lost in play, the long idleness of ignorant men, the vain designs that never take place, the vain designs of our many. I'm quoting the verses. Alberti has also imagined a high mountain where all the objects of desire and hope boil as in a cauldron, and around which lie all the vows and all the prayers offered by men to the gods. It is, in a way, as if the moon, as if on the moon, love is destined to last forever, despite its failure, despite its imperfection. So Apollo 11 was only the first of space missions that allowed 12 human beings, so far, to live at least for a handful of hours in an environment different from our own. In none of those ventures did humanity find the slightest trace of what we had dreamed of in country. So no object, no lost objects, no love. Not only there is nothing that we lost, but no object, living beings, inhabited landscapes are found either. However, that emptiness and desolation failed to extinguish the fire of the dream that Aldrin himself had formulated in the first moments of the satellite recognition. He said, at a certain point, this will be our home for the next 2 hours. We want to take care of it. And this is my starting point. Sorry for the loud, boomback. I would like today to start from this sentence that escaped Aldrin in a very, very distraught way, because it's a poignant and bitter image to make the moon the new home of humanity. I would like to take it for an instant seriously, to radicalize and to deduce from this aborted desire the program of a new planetary architecture. In fact, let us assume for a moment that, like new Adam and Eve, the two astronauts really decided to move to the moon and try the methods of the dendrites, so to reproduce in the way like Lucian said. Now, I already tried to show that to move is a very peculiar way to understand what is a house. Every time that you move, you really understand what does it mean, what a house, what your home is. First of all, you realize that we need a home not to have a roof over us, but to live better, to be better. The problem, at least in Western countries, is never to go from having no home to having a home, but to live better. The essence of a home is this adverb, better, which means literally more good. So home is a machine that must introduce more good inside our home, our lives, more happiness. This is what also Pier said. In short, every home is a moral machine that has to transform happiness into the form of a space. And so from this point of view, I would say that it's whatever you are drawing, whenever you are drawing a plan, you are drawing the topography, a specific topography of happiness. That's why your responsibility is always huge. Really huge. You are responsible of the lack of happiness of a huge amount of people. So take care. The second point that is clear whenever you are moving, and it's even more clear, is that the fact that a house is made up not of walls and roof, but of a set of objects, people, living beings, histories or atmospheres that take place within it, and that you have to bring on the other side of the ocean. This is your home. You can replace the walls, you cannot replace the persons. You have to bring your persons on another place. And from this point of view, you can define a house, a home, as a twist that we impose on the world so that it can become our world, so that the world has a place for our happiness. From this point of view, a home, it is literally the world insofar as it becomes the form of our happiness, and conversely, our happiness insofar as it becomes a worldly and not a purely psychological, sentimental, immaterial reality. So because of homes, happiness is a set of objects, persons, experiences in the world. That's why we want to come back every day to this place. Now, the move to the moon of the new Adam and Eve shows that there is a sort of transcendental element that every home must together embody and repeat. That's why it's interesting to analyze the attempt to move to the moon. There is something which is lacking there that we have to bring there, and this something is the most difficult element for Aldrin and Armstrong, the only one that would allow them to go rid of this magnificent desolation and lack of worldliness. It's not a peculiar object, but something as indefinable as the quintessence of planet Earth, as the earthness itself. So the planetarity, I don't know how to call it, but the fact to be on Earth. We need the Earth to be at home. We need to put the planet, the whole planet, inside home. After all, if you think about that, this is exactly what the projects on the 70s of Biosphere 2, you all know this project, that they wanted to move life on the moon, and what they did in a way was like to reproduce like the ecosystem of the world, and then to bring this terrestrial like complexity on the moon. And this is also the path that even today, like architects are trying to, to consider in order to build lunar station. I spent part of the summer with this amazing guy, because Guy Trott is like the first architect who designed, and starting from the 70s, lunar stations, and he's also designing now the lunar station that will be in the moon, like I think in 5-10 years, and also for the NASA, of course, but also for them, the point is how to, in a way, reproduce part of this earthness. So what interests me in this, perhaps delusional thought experience, is this curious and fragile equation between planet and home. That's the point. How can we think together both of them? Home, the domestic space, is not a portion of the planetary. It's in this case, it's intense and condensation. So if you have to make in the moon a home, the home must be the condensation of the planet, and that's what is interesting to think. Understanding what a home is, therefore, therefore means understanding what the planet is, what a planet is, and vice versa. Understanding of the planet becomes the understanding of the home. We never think about it, but the fact that the contemporary world has made ecology and not cosmology the science of the planet means this. This is a very important point. In the 4th century, the science of the planet was called cosmology. Was the science of the order. Today, the science of the planet is ecology. It's not just a terminological shift. Ecology is literally, as you know, the science of the house. So to think a planet means to think what is a house, and the other way round. And why it is interesting, I mean, it's interesting for you, because if it's true that the planet is a home, it's architecture and not ecology that should, at the same time, let us understand what is a planet and also build the planet. I'm for the destruction of ecology and for the substitution of ecology through architecture. So, because literally, architecture, ecology is the science of home, so you are the specialist, or you are the one supposed to be the specialist. Or after this cycle, you will be very good specialist. So I want to reflect with you on this kind of equivalence and try to draw 3 consequences or three points. The question of the change of the nature of domestic space, the question of the fact that whenever you're thinking that you have to realize that home is a space where the public and the private mingle, and then the fact that when you're thinking together home and planetarity, you have to think a home as a space in which the distinction between city and countryside no longer exists. So first of all, let's say the first story that I wanted to tell you is about the evolution of a very common domestic object, the telephone. Originally, it was a very trivial object that was meant to allow us, or to allow the very private and inaccessible domestic space to be linked to the rest of the planetary space. It was a kind of interdomestic corridor. It was in itself a threshold because it allowed real-time communication with the rest of the world without leaving home. Over time, however, this object sort of absorbed all the space around. It encompassed the living room, the bedroom, the hallways, not only those of the house who used it, but also those to whom it addressed. By encompassing the house and the other homes, the telephone made itself autonomous from relation to a specific topographic location, and more importantly, it made ourselves autonomous and indifferent to our geographical location. Our smartphones have become windows and living room, door and hallway, allowing us to connect with countless people around the world, bypassing cities and geography. The smartphone has changed the very idea of family. Because we no longer live only between partners or with partners and children. We are colocataires, I don't know how to say in English, just we are living with at least 4 or 5 people with which every single day we exchange at least 5 or 6 WhatsApp messages. It is like as we would be, again, university students who are sharing a common living room. So from this point of view, this extension of domestic space, it's the change of the status of domestic change. So in a way, first of all, I would say that through this smartphone, our living rooms have incorporated the city squares of the 20th century. The home itself has become the form and the matter of public space. Mobile phones also allowed our homes to lose their territoriality. The home follows us everywhere. Thanks to them, we are at home, and there will be always a room for ourselves and our dears, wherever we are and wherever we go. So from this point of view, through this object, planet and home coincide. Why is interesting? Because, and this is like my first thesis in a way, this object is the grotesque, of course, but still the prototype of what we can call a planetary home. So a space where, in a way, a relationship with the planet, a relationship with a specific person, literally coincide. And why it's interesting and why it's important to, in a way, stress this aspect, first of all, because it's from this object that you have to design your modular and not from this guy with raised hands. But it's important because it, in a way, denies or it obliges you to abandon the fundamental dogma of perhaps architecture, but at least modernism, which is the idea that you are manipulating space. Actually, to build a home doesn't mean necessarily to give to space a form. A home, because of that, has no more relationship immediately with space. It's an object that produces, in a way, relationship without having without having a form in a space. So designing a house no longer means drawing lines in a space. It means producing objects that put you in relationship with someone who is not in the same place with you. So that space is changing today, and there's nothing territorial, nothing metric, nothing real, is obvious also if you look at the great change in digital technology. Let me give a trivial example, that of smart glasses. In the past, if you think about that, the idea of digital space that we used to call metaverse, literally, a universe which is beyond our universe. So in the past, the digital space implied the idea of another space, of a universe which is beyond our universe. In short, there was a physical, cosmic, spatial separation between the digital world and the real or physical world. To enter the metaverse was or meant to wear different eyes that took us out of the ordinary experience. The relationship was that between walking and dreaming. In contrast, smart glasses redefine the relationship between the digital world and the real world based on the principle that the former is simply an intensification, a congestion of the latter. If we need smart glass, it's because in order to enter the digital world, we must continue to see the real world and to see it better, and vice versa. Seeing the technical world means continuing to see reality, because the digital world is simply the optical and ontological depth of the real world. Something that has always been there, but we have been unable to see because of a kind of presbyopia. So it's no longer a matter of communicating, but it's a way to see better what is there. It's the opposite. If you want, smart glasses are the opposite of telescopes. So, after all, smart glasses allow an infinite real to persist in space without belonging to it. This is what happened with smart glasses, but this is also what happened with smartphone. In a way, wherever you receive or you leave a voice message or a video call, the person is there without having an ontological relationship with the space. Technically, it will be said that the smartphone and the smart glasses, and in general, actually all digital technologies, turns us into demons. The demon in Mediterranean theology was the mobile subject, the I, the ego, insofar as it is able to bind itself to a body without needing to be perfectly reflected in it and ontologically dependent on it. The demon is an I that is relatively autonomous from the form, the nature of the bodies it inhabits, and precisely because of this can go anywhere. In short, it's a form of subjectivity that no longer has an immediate and isomorphic connection with anatomic corporeality. Actually, it sounds abstract, but it's exactly the experience that you have whenever you play video games. If you think about that, whenever you're playing, I don't know, Death Stranding or The Legend of Zelda or even Mario, what are you? You are experiencing a strange change in the relationship between your consciousness and the body through which you are experiencing the world. In a way, we continue to be an I, but we are minds literally occupying or possessing another body, like the body of Mario, the body of Link, or the body of whatever. Experiencing someone else's sensory experience. In video games, even when we are not playing the game from a subjective point of view, we perceive the world from the point of view of someone else who in turn act through our subjectivity. Through these processes, our consciousness becomes the mind of a body that does not coincide with our anatomy. So whenever we are playing video games, our body becomes the vehicle of our demonic nature. We become demons occupying an alien body, and whenever you are speaking with a smartphone with someone else, this someone else is a demon, and you are a demon for this someone else. Which is beautiful, because this shows us that the house, because of this object, becomes a sort of demonic fact. So it's not simply haunted by ghosts like in horror films. Now we are the ghosts, occupying all the space of the planet. So, second story, it's just a comment about, again, this kind of very strange story of the two guys who moved to the moon. So, imagine that Aldrin and Armstrong are there, still there, and they are a real family. Why can we speak about those two as a real family, even if they cannot reproduce? So it's since the 90s that European sociology has begun to reflect on the fact that the erotic experience and the institution of the family had freed themselves from the two moral and social imperatives to which they were subject: the patrimonial imperative and the reproductive imperative. Indeed, for millennia, the family was the structure that allowed women excluded from paid work and property an access to wealth, patrimony, and inheritance, but only by obliging them to the integral consecration of existence to the reproduction of the family itself and the management of the offspring. So it was a form of slavery, allowed slavery. The family was, from this point of view, a space of a kind of unearned and therefore unpaid labor of reproducing the productive force, in a paradoxical exclusion from wealth. In this modern perspective, defended and articulated not only by various forms of Marxism, but also by ethnography, it's not something that I'm inventing, families coincide with the genealogical machine, and each of its traits must be brought off in the need to make produced wealth a genealogical and transmissible fact. Thus, this is like the explication that, for instance, Marx and what's the name of the guy, a friend of with Marx? Engels. Marx and Engels gave about why patriarchy did come out, or what is the cause of patriarchy. it was, so the patriarchy, so the clear gender imbalance for them is a consequence of the male monopoly of ownership of the means of wealth production, which presupposes actually the necessity of the certainty of the identity of the offspring in order to guarantee the vertical transmission of the same wealth. So the idea of Marx and Engels is the fact that patriarchy was born because once that you produce the division of labor, you have like males producing wealth and women reproducing, the males had to be certain about who is the child of whom. And that's why patriarchy began. So what is interesting is the fact that the real core of patriarchy is genealogy and inheritance. So it was, among others, especially Anthony Giddens, who demonstrated that if women's access to work freed couples from the first imperative, so from the imperative of producing wealth or having an access to wealth, homosexual culture freed the idea of the couple from the genealogical imperative. So what Giddens, I don't know if you have read it, he was one of the most incredible minds of his time, and he actually proved that the idea of to being in a couple with someone without having without having any desire for having children was produced by homosexual LGBT culture, and that from this point of view, everybody today, whenever they are in a couple without having the idea of having a child, they are living this form of life invented by LGBT culture, which is a very ironic and beautiful, just sociological evidence. Out of this twofold liberation emerged what Giddens called a pure relationship, a relationship autonomous from any end other than itself, a social relationship undertaken for its own sake. So whenever you are not with someone for having an access to patrimony or for having a children, you are, for the first time in history, you experience a relationship where you are with someone just in order to be with this someone. And this is a very, very recent, contemporary Western invention. We'd say Western LGBT invention. This is what Giddens says. It's not, and it's of course, I will skip a little bit because this is like something that makes the relationship extremely difficult. Because, I mean, it's easier to be with someone if you have a task, like an economic task or a productive task, if you are with someone just because you want to be with this someone. And in this relationship, each of you has to, so to say, to develop from an emotional or from a personal point of view. The relationship is much more fragile because every single day you are questioning the idea if it makes sense to be with the other or not, or the other way around. So that's why contemporary sociology, and then also today people like Eva Illud said that because of this purification of relationship becomes way more fragile and way more vulnerable. But what is interesting is that actually contrary to Giddens' imagination, the autonomization to the love relationship and its liberation from genealogy is not a purely psychological fact, and it's not only about the structure of intimacy, it's also and above all a legal metamorphosis. A seminal work by Kat Weston had showed that the US LGBT culture had moved from the 90s from a period in which the evocation of a lesbian or gay identity coincide with the rejection of family, or, I quote, an exile from kinship, to a period in which it sought to think about a queer form of family. It was the time when, in a way, since the 90s, especially the Bay Area LGBT culture said, no, to be gay or lesbian doesn't mean anymore to reject the family, to reject the kinship. We have to queerize the family and to transform the family into an institution which is no more patriarchal, which is no more heterosexual, which is also queer. And that's the moment where, like, the word, the relationship, the expression chosen family was invented. And that's actually what led to the invention of legal formula of the gay marriage, which is the biggest anthropological revolution of the last 3,000 years. Actually, it's the first time that some states put on legal codes that if you're marrying someone, it's not in order to have children. This was the point. In order to make homosexual marriage possible, the point was not to say that you can have a marriage between people of the same gender. The problem was that in legal text, marriage was, since like the Roman times in Europe and so in Western civilization, linked to the obligation on having children. And why it's huge as a revolution? Because if you put on legal text that you are marrying someone just to be with someone and not to have a children, then the number 2 becomes totally arbitrary. Then you can marry 3 persons, 4 persons, 5 persons, 6 persons. And why that's so important, why that's so, it's not and it's so happening. There is a couple of things happening, for instance, in Somerville, in Massachusetts, where judges recognize that 3 persons living together are married. Why it's important? Because if you imagine we are married all together, there is a huge problem, which is our family name. So family names, in this case, cannot be anymore linked to genealogy. It's no more a case of opposing the matrilineal to the patrilineal family name to make the name of the mother or the name of the father. No, we had to invent a name, let's say Coca-Cola, which is just expressing our intention to live a very beautiful and sparkling life. But why, and this is already in a way of transforming kinship and genealogy, but the other consequence is important. It's the fact that if you are changing family names, if you are changing kinship, you are changing the structure of inheritance, which is the financial structure of the entire society. So I have to skip some points because otherwise I cannot come to the end. But this is a very important element. So the family, so the legal element which is supposed to live in a house, has nothing to do with this traditional image that you probably have, or that sometimes when it comes to social housing, we see in the legal text of father, mother, children, or child. No, family is now a free association among people who don't live together, not even in order to have sex. From this point of view, you have to take as model 2 very successful American TV shows, The Seinfelds and Friends, which were extremely important. Why? Because if you think about that, the 2 shows showed so that the house is the space of friendship, and the couple, the erotic relationship, is just a part of this extended network of friendship, network whose space is the home. So homes today are the space of this friendship where probably people are sharing the same family name, but they're not probably fucking together, or they are, I don't know, who knows, or they are making, like in France, everybody's taking the partner of the other. So this is the second point. Sorry for I have to cut because I want to come to the third point. Yeah, sorry. So the third story I want to tell is called the Anthropocene. So one way to tell this story is to say that our home, the home of humanity, has encompassed so much of the world and so much of the planet that there is no longer an outer space. It is as if we set foot anywhere and left traces on the planet, just as a child might leave his Legos or their pants on the floor. And that's because our planet has become our home. But the opposite is also true. Actually, it is as if the planet has invaded our apartments. It is as if inside of the house of humanity, we no longer find just partners, children, dogs, cats, forsythia, at most a few cockroaches and mice, but all living species, even the least beautiful, the least pleasant. All species now have become pets. This is a very good definition of Anthropocene. Anthropocene is a space where every single species is within our house. So, and we have to invent a relationship with every single species, the same relationship that we have with dogs or cats, and vice versa. We have to make all other species treat us as if we were their dogs or their cats. Sort of multi-species, multi-kingdom polyamory theory. It is the logic of this love that will have to constitute the new domestic modular. No longer the silhouette of a human body raising its hand, but completely disparate bodies mirroring each other. So there is something very interesting in what we call interspecific love, because it's something that embodies the exact opposite of what Lacan called the mirror phase, and in which would allow every human being to recognize themselves as such through the gaze of the father. Indeed, if you think about it, whenever we are welcoming dogs or cats under our roof, that means to learn to relate to this life that is intertwined with ours every day, forgetting that it's an individual belonging to another species. In a way, after years, after days, months, years, your cat, your dog, I don't know what's the name of dogs or cats here in Switzerland. In Italy it could be Goccia, Figaro, I don't know, Fritz, or whatever. But your cat, your dog, will simply be the intensity of an anonymous life, which no longer belongs to either feline, canines, or hominids, because it's an indistinct, playful, and uncontrollable affection intensity of love. And we, ourselves, we become an anonymous life for those animals who forget that the lives that are in front of them belong to human species. So from this point of view, it's in this anonymous life that love manifests itself most radically. Whether we are pets, human, or objects, we need love to secrete this anonymous life capable of circulation and without identity. The paradox of love can be formulated like that. We need love to liberate us from our identity and to liberate those who we love from their identity. We need the other species in order to liberate we need the other species to liberate through love those who live with us from the game of one on the other identity. Love is this process of mutual subtraction of face, the liberation of face and identity. That's why sometimes can be violent. But violence, it's not about losing the face. Violence is only the fact that you want to keep your face once that the one you love has lost their face for you, or the other way around. So true domestication, true like becoming the home for others, is only the love that allows us to lose our face in the faceless gaze of the other. And homes, the new homes that you have to build, will have to be machines that allows us this love for companion species to be extended to other species. So from this point of view, homes should be more and more like machines that like free us from our humanity, machine that makes us alive, that no longer needs to know to which species we belong in order to be happy. Now, to think of homes as the place of cosmic mixing means to radicalize the logic of hybridization. So homes is the space of and the temple of love, but love is for us actually, or for the common way of thinking, in its most basic elemental biological form, has a specific name, which is sex. Now, sex, if you think from a purely biological point of view, if you think about that, is something very interesting. As you know, there is sex was invented before even to link sex to reproduction. There is, first of all, in biology, sex without reproduction. It's like, it's the case, for instance, the first time that biologists discovered that was for paramecia. Paramecia are like protists, are very simple and unicellular beings. They are making sex without reproducing each other, which means that two like individuals, they are coming close the one to another, and they are starting to exchange genes. It's as if I'm going out with, I don't know, with Xavi, and I'm taking his nose and giving him my eyes, and so we are mixing, but there is no third. There is just, we are just like different, the one from our past. Each of us is different from the past. So, and sex is actually exactly this element of this process of hybridization, of losing your identity through the contact with someone else, even before reproduction. So, from this point of view, it's only by producing an absolute coincidence of home and mutual penetration of identity that it can once again become the measure of a planetary happiness shared among species. We scarcely think about it, but at bottom, since we are the result of that technique of transformation of the self and of the other that generates unspeakable pleasure, the technique that we call sex, each of us is all the almost geological sedimentation of an incalculable amount of pleasure of other individuals and other species or lives and form we have never known. We are the form of that pleasure declined only in the third person, which we never ever can experience again. Life is always the echo of this pleasure that has become geology. Species and individuals are the fossils of this ancestral pleasure of mixing genes and phases. And like volcanoes, we cannot help but try to repeat this pleasure of a strange transformation of our bodies. All lives do nothing but desperately seek these pleasures. And homes, perhaps, will have to be the more or less successful attempt to share this pleasure with as many life forms as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuele, for this wonderful lecture, which is really full of provocations and thought, actually, in the really quintessential meaning of the word. But I would like to challenge one of your from your remark, because in a way, I mean, what it seems to me that really emerged from your lecture is this idea, which could also be a possible title, which is this idea of an anti-genealogical domestic space. No? So how we can imagine a domestic space, which actually comes from domus, and the domus was really all about genealogy. How we can imagine this contradiction in terms, a domestic space that rejects, its ontological purpose of being a genealogical machine. And I think that this idea of learning from animal species, of coexisting with them, or using them, or being used by them to reject this sort of genealogical mechanism, I found it really provoking. Actually remind me, I don't know if you agree, this famous episode of Francis of Assisi, who was trying to reject the idea of property, and he was actually preaching to the animals, to the birds. And as you remember, Giorgio Agamben really argue, because birds and animals, in fact, don't have this concept of property. But then you seem to imply, and correct me if I'm wrong, that somehow what you call modern architecture was in fact resisting to that possibility. But in fact, I would argue that for me, modern architecture, at least its most radical forms, were in fact maybe an aborted or failed attempt to actually exactly go in the direction that you want us to go. And I'm sure you know this famous short essay, which in my opinion is one of the best texts on perhaps domestic space, which is The Destructive Character by Walter Benjamin. And Benjamin really thought, maybe he was wrong, that the houses of Adolf Loos or Le Corbusier were in fact making tabula rasa. I mean, in a way, destroying any identity. He quotes the famous poem by Bertolt Brecht, Erase the Trace, trying to really make houses generic platforms where anything can happen. In fact, many of these architects were influenced by residential hotels, were influenced by very radical forms of domesticity, when in fact the family was no longer there. So in a way, it seems to me that you are almost like remaking a radical modernist manifesto about domestic space.
No, thank you so much. First of all, no, I don't think I ever said that modernity resists to this trend. First of all, because I'm a convinced modernist in the sense that modernity can be described in infinite ways. Even architectural modernism has been declined in an infinite. I mean, architectural modernism in Morocco or in Uzbekistan are totally different. What the way it is was built in Italy or in Switzerland. So, but beyond of that, I mean, you are the one who studied this very clear line that brings the modern language of architecture from cloisters to hotels and to individuals or individuals' rooms a la Virginia Woolf. So from this point of view, there is a very clear, almost typological line in modern architecture, which is la maison des célibataires from this point of view. So how do you say in English célibataire? A bachelor's machine. So it's also in the art tradition. But the point is that perhaps if we can move a critic to modernism, is that this was just a spatial idea and not translated into a legal idea, into a structure of society. What is happening today is that we don't have to produce the spatial illusion of being a bachelor in order to abandon genealogy. Now, what happened in the last decades is the beginning of a radical transformation of what, in a way, of what Lévi-Strauss has called les structures élémentaires de la parenté, the elementary structure of kinship. They are lost forever, lost in the sense, no, it's good to have that. They have been changed forever. So now what started to happen is that family, not being a bachelor, family is different. And this is a huge revolution, because one thing is to build spaces for forms of life which are no more familiar, and another thing is to say, it's what happened in the 90s, because it's to say, no, family itself has nothing to do with genealogy. This is a much more radical revolution for three reasons. First of all, because it's not just like a, how can I say, a kind of dandyism of a couple of an elite of individuals. It's like now the way how society affirms to be structured. The second element is because it implies a huge revolution in the financial to attack the family, to attack the kinship, means that you have to rethink the distribution, the intergenerational distribution of wealth. And if you think about that, just think 1 second. If you cannot leave what you own to your children, property disappears. Because this is a huge problem in legal theory. You cannot distinguish real property to the fact that you are possessing something if you cannot transmit what you own to after your death. So that's why to reform genealogy means to reform the economy of a society. And thirdly, because what is happening today, socially, and that's why architecture can help or can improve, is not that people are refusing making children. This is a very important point. The question is not stopping to having children, like Donna Haraway suggested making kin and not children. No, the question is to trivialize having children and to make a divorce between being a family and having a children, which is, in a way, if you think about that, the trivial condition of at least the half of the population in Western states, in Western nations, countries. So if you think about that, I'm living this situation in the sense that I have a child, but this child, my daughter, is like part of at least two families. My family, the family of her mother, and then there is the family of their grandparents, who are no more speaking with the mother, so it's like really a third family, and so on. So in a way, what is happening is that today, almost every single child belongs to at least two families. That means that even from this point of view, being a child and to belong to the family is not the same. So genealogy and family are divorced. And we can invent a lot of devices. For instance, one could also, in order to equalize stuff, one could also invent measures like every child must be from the beginning, from the birth, assigned to more than one family. Not just the biological one, but other family. But in a way, what is interesting is to say that, unlike the past, the destruction of the patriarchal order as not to pass through the destruction of the family, and as not to pass through the destruction of the fact of having children. It's just you distinguish being a family and having children, and then everything changes. So that's the...
Any question from the audience? Martin?
If there's no one, I try to ask an intellectual question. I will try to do that. So first, thanks for your lecture, and I appreciate the first image, which shows that two men at the moon. How to say, they are domesticated in a suit, which came also to this kind of quotation that Marshall McLuhan said that the house is usually an extension of the skin, as we know this quotation. So they were in a very private moment, in a very small skin, but they also shared, let's say, they had the biggest house of the world at the end, in the story of Virilio, because this house had so many cables which was attached to the public, that they, in the sense, domesticated the entire planet. I think 7 million or how many people saw that. And if we're looking at this image with this eye, I was like, wow, first time when you start to speak about that, there were things coming together, let's say, in my mind. But then there was another story arising up, which was also a little bit also merging things, what I discovered in the last weeks when we also worked on the topic. So making a home can be also described with the term, let's say in German we say einrichten, which the word has richten also in that. If I translate this in English, it's like we're furnishing around us something, which is not right, because einrichten is also setting up something. So setting up in German, however, also has the aftertaste that we set up ourselves up in a place as a reference point. So we are the reference point, and we're putting the things around us, which is, let's say, a little bit as the ancient thing when we had the cosmology, that the universe turns around the Earth, which is not right. So we're putting us as a reference point. No order is subjective, I would say, just like happiness. I think everybody has a different feeling of order around himself, and also about happiness. So happiness, I think, has also shades of gray. But both have one thing in common. When we set up, we manipulate the environment. I mean, by setting up to do this kind of engagement, we are manipulating the environment in sense of climate, of light, and of all that kind of things which are describing the environment. So now the question automatically arises, how much manipulation we can expect to our planet, and in the end, because if I would say the planet itself is the house, so the first, every domestication is like a house in a house. Why I came to this question is that there's a phenomenon by showing an image how we try to inhabit the moon and the Mars. It's a territory which is very interesting to prevision, that if we travel there, we will losing our capacity to see. Because there's a simple VIIP syndrome, because all astronauts which are traveling there, they cannot more see. And the problem today to go on the Mars is that if we're arriving there, we're getting blind. So we have to domesticate other places. We tried also to manipulate this kind of travel. The same story we had, we are in Switzerland. That's a territory which is impossible usually to domesticate, because the country itself has no yield. And if we would continue to live here without manipulation, we will have also a very strange form. There was an ancient time quotation by Mark Twain, who said, when he visited Switzerland, it was 100 years ago, he said, I saw the two important things of Switzerland. One, it was the Matterhorn, and the other one, it was the Gorge. So because that was an example that the territory of Switzerland is uninhabitable only with manipulations. So the question is, I would say in the philosophical sense, I would be interested what is this kind of limit of manipulations, what we should investigate.
So thank you. I don't know if I'm able to answer to the huge amount of questions you formulated, but thank you so much. First of all, I started from this like commentary on the garment. Yes, of course. There is a very beautiful book by I don't remember the name.
Thomas de
but
Monchon.
yeah, exactly. He's teaching at MIT. Who wrote like a book on the suit, on the moon suit. But what is interesting is that here we are even beyond what like Semper and McLuhan said about the relationship between house and textile, because here we can see that, I mean, it's quite amazing if you think that we could get to the moon thanks to fashion. So it gives to fashion a strong power, much stronger that we are, ready to recognize to it. So, but of course, in a way we could say that every house, but this is something which has been said in a way already by McLuhan, every house is a cloth which has become so big that it can encompass or include other living beings. And the question is like perhaps to build a garment which is as big as the earth. Concerning the second or the third, the aspect about the question about Einrichten and so on. First of all, I would like to, there is a very beautiful, very beautiful book by one of the founder of what has been called anthropology of material anthropology. His name is Daniel Miller. He's teaching or used to teach in London, and he took like 30 apartments or houses in a street of London, and he described the way how people have eingerichtet, have like disposed object, which objects, how many objects, and so on. So the kind of, he took every single inhabitant as an interior designer, and he tried to describe each model as a form of, there are his words, portative cosmology, which is beautiful. I mean, each domestic space is a sort of cosmos in itself, which, in a way, allows us to give to the question a first answer, which is actually, if you think about that, actually every single house is an exercise of spatial surrealism. Actually, you have to resist to this very literal and very domestic, very romantic, like, how can you say, injunction of a very stupid form of ecological thinking, which is to say that every house should be like immediately like equivalent to its environment. We build houses to graft within the space universes which have nothing to do with the context. That's why we wanna build houses. So a house is not a balance with the environment. A house is a graft. I don't know if you have read, like a couple of months ago, no, 3 months ago, there is a very beautiful book written by a colleague of us, whose name is Ginny Gang, published a book about the title is something like the architectural art of grafting, or the art of architectural grafting. And Ginny's thesis is a very beautiful, very simple, but very beautiful thesis. The idea, a very simple idea, that to be an architect means to be a grafter. And it's a kind of answer to this very stupid, like kind of very rough alternative between, let's say, she's from Chicago. If you don't know it, she's the architect who did, like, for instance, the renewal of the Natural History Museum in New York. She did a lot in Chicago. She also built here in Europe. She did the skyscraper in Amsterdam and so on. So, but her theory is a kind of trying to take a third way between the opposite, between the architectural practice in the States, which is like the typical modernist attitude. You destroy everything and you rebuild from scratch. Or the European, let's say, I'm joking, but like the European, the Italian attitude, which is you have never ever to destroy anything from the past, and you oblige people to live in houses that were built in like for the Romans. So preservation or reconstruction from scratch. In a way, and she says the key is grafting. Why grafting? Because grafting is to, in a way, preserve a part of the past, but also to be conscious that the past is not able to live by itself. In order to let the past live, you have to graft into the past some new elements. And only this new can allow the past to survive. So in a way, the past is a corpse. You have to put life into the past in order to let the past live. And what is interesting is that the theory of architectural composition as a grafting is a very beautiful theory, because if you think about that, think of grafting in biology, as you know, the wine you are drinking is always produced by graft, because it's like there is a base which belongs to one cultivar, and then you have to graft another cultivar on that. So that means that grafting improves always also the quality of the past, and the decomposition is not a formal one, an aesthetical one. In order to see if a graft works, life should just flow. So this is like the criterion. So from this point of view, it's important to see every house cannot be in balance with the environment. A house is a grafter. So a house, to build a home means to graft something in a space where this element didn't exist. And the point is not manipulating or not manipulating. The point is, can life flow better or not? That's the point. But what you are grafting should be totally different from what is already there. Otherwise, your work makes no sense. Otherwise, the best way to solve like ecological problem is to kill humanity. But it is called a suicide, not architecture. So, another answer to your question, sorry for my long, but the question was long, so the answer will be long, is, so in a way, whenever you are building a home, the fact that we need homes means that we don't have a natural relationship with the earth. This idea, it's the idea that unfortunately the ecological debate is like affirming as it was like the truth. It's wrong and very dangerous. There is no, in any kind of species, not just for humans, no immediate relationship between a living being and the space which is occupying. Because every living being has to transform, manipulate, radically change the environment in which it exists. I give you just an example. A tree is changing radically the pH, the acidity, the composition, the texture of the soil where is existing. Or a worm. You know, the last book written by Darwin was a book about worms, and Darwin in this book contradicts himself because he used to say that animals should adapt to the environment. In this book, he proves that the life of the worms changes radically the environment, the soil, and that's because of this change that agriculture is possible. So it's and for Darwin, for instance, this was the first element of culture, because worms are changing the soil and they're transmitting this change to the future generations. So there is the beginning of culture. Culture is that you're changing the world and you're transmitting this change to the future generations. So from this point of view, life is manipulation of the environment, always. And it's because of this manipulation that life could explode. I mean, the Earth, I don't have the images, but the Earth, at the very beginning of the life, you know that the Earth was formed 4,600,000,000 of years ago. But it was not a paradise, it was literally the hell. It was a ball of fire. And it's just because a huge amount of individuals belonging to a huge amount of species of different kingdoms chiseled day after day every single square meter of the lithosphere or the hydrosphere and the atmosphere that we can live on Earth. So the question is never, don't touch the environment. This is bullshit. I mean, this is if living beings are not touching the environment, then the future beings cannot live. It's like on the moon. Nobody's touching nothing. Nobody lives there. So it's like the question is not to manipulate. The question is how to invent a manipulation that multiply your life and the life of others. That's why, for instance, the debate about footprints is a very, very reactionary debate because it suggests that you should just not walk on Earth, don't leave traces. It's not. We have to leave traces because every single living being is leaving traces. The question is the quality of traces you are leaving. It's like, it's not when you're writing, you have to leave traces, otherwise you have to speak, otherwise you die. The question is speak well, so live well, not stop living.
In your lecture, you've been, I feel, using the words house and home kind of interchangeably. So,
yeah.
I was wondering, because like, at least for me, housing, dwelling is something different than home. Home is more related to the feeling of someone like living there and then sort of like creating some sort of feeling of home. And where do you like kind of draw the difference between housing and home in a way? Because yeah, I feel like home is more about feeling somehow and creating some place where you feel like it's your house, but then it becomes your home because you're there and you're arranging objects around you, but it depends on, for instance, people, or you said like pets or something like this. It's more, I feel, about feelings than housing or dwelling is more about construction, and then inside this kind of canvas you create your home.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's a quite interesting problem and a quite delicate question. I would say that your job, what you are doing every single day and what you're learning here is the evidence that this distinction makes no sense. Otherwise, first of all, we wouldn't need you. I mean, if the question, what do I mean? I mean that this idea that happiness is just a feeling is a huge lie. No. Actually, happiness is very material. It's the fact that what we feel is also out there in the form of the space. That's a house. A house is the fact that your home is not just schwebende, not just like a floating state of mind. No, there is a bathroom, it's your partner, but it's a material composition which is extremely difficult to build. That's why we need architects. So from this point of view, architecture should never ever accept this duality. I mean, in the sense that should never accept that there is something like a house, which is a purely abstract, formal aggregate of walls and roofs. No, houses are always homes for someone or for more than someone's. And on the other hand, there is never ever just homes. No, there are houses in the world. And there are the process of domestication, which is, as you said also, a very complicated process because it's always a process of negotiation. It's not just that's why, for instance, it makes no sense to think of homes just as feelings, because to make something, to make a space, a home, means to negotiate not just with other people or with the landlord, but also with your own past, with ghosts, with the cat who is putting a shit everywhere. So it's like this is like domesticate a space, transforming like this space in your space. But from this point of view, I would say that you as architect have to reject this distinction, because otherwise you are just building very bad, very ugly, unlivable houses.
Thank you. And my question is, what in your opinion is the ultimate stimuli for people, for human to pursue more?
Wait, the ultimate? What is, in my opinion, the ultimate?
Stimuli.
Yeah.
For human being to pursue more intellectual pleasure. Because I think it's hard for us architects to imagine the better form of housing, the better material form of pleasure. So who is paying for this? And in what?
In which sense, who is paying for this?
Who is paying for our work on housing, on the evolution of housing?
So you asked me a lot of questions together. I would say, first of all, the question about stimuli. I mean, we are speaking about life. We are not speaking about special, very strange forms of practices. Here we're speaking about, in a way, I repeat the idea that what is a house? Because normally in theory we have in mind this primordial ancestral scene where humanity is an hunter-gatherer, and then suddenly they decide to have a house, to build houses. And you have a lot of stories like Logier, who said it's just a couple of branches, but this is mythology. Nobody of us passed from the wild life to the house. Each of you just passed in their life from one house to another. So house is like the form of your life and the form of life of everybody. The question is how to make your life and the life of someone else better. So this is huge, because it says you that what you are inventing is the spatial formula of this being better. This is your task when you're building a house. This is what you have to invent. This is why people ask an architect. Otherwise, people would build themselves houses, and it's not a good idea. I was telling to Sophie that I was in this is like something for as a praise of architecture. I was in January, I was in Iquique. Iquique, as you know, is like a very beautiful city in Chile, close to the desert of Atacama, where there is the most famous project made by this Chilean architect named Alejandro Aravena. I think perhaps you should stop to record. And you know, this project is like this complex of half-built housing units, where the idea was, I myself as an architect, I build just the half and leave the rest to the owner, inhabitant. It's like I'm very generous. I'm signing the project and winning a Pritzker Prize, but and I was there to visit because it was like as a kind of pilgrimage to the mastermind of an architect, and it is like the worst housing complex I ever saw. Really, it's like even worse than a favela, because you see this like almost decadent units built by Aravena, and then even before you see the rest that the people who now live there has built, you see a huge amount of very expensive cars, and then like walls with like paper. So people prefer to spend money in cars than give a form to the rest of their houses, which says at least three things. First of all, that this idea is a very populist one, very, very dangerous one. Why? Because people don't have, because it's wrong. The kind of idea that Rudowski like inoculated in modernity, that there is a vernacular knowledge about how to be happy, how to build like houses. This perhaps in the 60s, but in contemporary world, no. You have the key, people not. In the same sense that there are people who can code and people who cannot code. So from this point of view, it's important to me to stress that you have, as architects, you have the codes of this very alchemical operation, which is how to transform the basic requirements for happiness into a spatial form. Now, your question is, how can we learn? Just live, I don't know. It depends from, you have to expose yourself to life. This is like the basic, and perhaps schools should also like be this kind of, also from this point of view, perhaps in architectural schools, there should be also teachings about more than technical. That's why philosophy, perhaps it's important that perhaps it should be much more moral philosophy in the sense of what does it mean happiness. And it's not an answer to say everybody thinks of happiness in their own way. This is not an answer. This is just an irresponsible way of dealing with the question. So from this point of view, yeah, the only answer is say you have to ask the director of the school to hire professors.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Emanuele. I think your lecture was really inspiring, but also your answer to our questions, I think, was an extra lecture, and we are really grateful for your generosity. I think you leave in this room very thought-provoking remarks, which I'm sure will have consequence on our imagination of our housing projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you.